The Book of the Damned by Charles Fort. Part 4. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we are coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Everest Plateau. And I'll just apologize beforehand. I have allergies or something, so I'll have a cough and sniffles and throat clearing and all that good stuff.
That's what you got the old mute button for.
Yeah. I've noticed that, but when I'm reading, I tend to sit cross-legged. And I think of the mute button, and I'm, I've got my leg crossed, and I'm holding the phone right here, and I'm like, I look at the mute button, and I can't get to it. So maybe I need to put it up on the counter.
Yeah. But we are actually joined by the Watcher today.
That's right.
So it's a rare occasion these days, as the Watcher is finding lots of things to do in space. How you doing there, buddy? Welcome back to the show.
Doing great, guys. Glad to be here. I'm moving to a less busy part of space starting next week. So
all right.
Hopefully there'll be a little run of me being able to be around more often. But super excited to be here.
Well, we're in the middle of the Book of the Damned, and so you need to go back and listen to the first 3 episodes to catch up for where we are, so that you can have commentary on what we're talking about here. Weird things raining from the skies.
I'll definitely I'll do that during my space journey. The first part of which, strangely enough, involves traveling to Indianapolis. But,
Over Indianapolis, under it.
Yeah,
actually,
and under simultaneously.
That's right.
Due to dimensional warping.
That's right. So last episode, we completely forgot space weather news, so let's go ahead and do that right now. For spaceweather.com. Emerging sunspots. Additional sunspots are emerging over the northeastern limb of the sun as solar rotation turns the source of last week's huge explosion, which we totally didn't hear about because we forgot space weather news, towards Earth.
Right when something serious happens.
I know, there was a gigantic explosion last week and we didn't report on it. So far, the ensemble of spots does not appear capable of a repeat performance, but soon we will have a better idea of their magnetic complexity and the potential for strong flares, so stay tuned.
Wasn't it on the backside?
Yeah, it was not facing us. Yeah,
it's not facing us.
Yeah.
But the sun has a backside.
That's right. That's right.
We're not aware. I think that's where
there is another side to the disk.
It's the back
right.
of the sun.
Current conditions, solar wind speed 527.1 kilometers per second, and the density is a relatively high 10.4 protons per cubic centimeter. Current sunspot number is 49. Neutron count is only 6.2% above the space age average. That's the lowest I think I've ever seen it. And the KP index is rated at 3, which is quiet, but the 24-hour max was 4, which is the low end of the unsettled or stormy range. So that's space weather news. We also, the other things we forgot to cover last week, we didn't do. What's the rock and roll update?
Yes, Watcher, the sun is mooning the other half of the solar system all the time.
That's right.
Rock and roll update is we think we finished the mixing yesterday. So it was kind of sad, but it was also, it was great. But yeah, we're just like, we were packing up everything out of there that's been there for like a month and a half. And it's kind of like, damn, we're not going to be coming back here every weekend. It was cool. So yeah, we had to go back and do 2 other remixes because the first 2 songs that we did, we were just really learning the board and learning the room and everything. And they just weren't as good as the rest of them. Like once we kind of, it took us a couple of days of working in there to really figure out what the sound should be like. So we got those 2 songs fixed. They're much better. on par with the others, and now we're in conversations with Lursen Mastering out in LA, and I think we're going to go with them for the mastering and just get a vinyl master and a high definition, high res master, and do digital and vinyl. So
Yeah. And you got to go back to the studio one more time for some tape.
we are going to run. Yeah. So the tape machine died.
And you guys
A little
wanted to
over.
do everything onto a brand new tape anyway or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
that was kind of the thought. It's like the tape machine died a little over halfway through, and I just was like, well, we'll buy some tape, and we'll run the whole album, all of the, you know, the mixes that we liked. We'll run them on to the tape. We'll record them onto tape. Let it sit for a couple hours or whatever, and then record them back to the computer.
Yeah. After the tape machine gets fixed.
I just got the note today that it is fixed.
Oh, okay.
So
maybe do that next weekend or something?
maybe it'll probably only be a couple hours.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Just go in even after work or something sometime.
Well, you got to leave it on there a couple hours.
It's true. Yeah. But yeah.
So that gives you time to like drink some beers, right?
Yeah, it'll take an hour to put the whole album on there. It's like, I think the album is about 72 minutes long, maybe.
Of course it is.
And then, yeah, let it sit for a couple hours and then run it back. So,
That'll
yeah.
be the final bit.
Yep.
All right, what about
Agricultural update. We
Yeah.
are pruning the grapes, and they have been being pruned for a while. And now it's down to doing the final close prune for the mature grapes, where we're pruning back for fruiting shoots to sprout in the spring. So leaving 1 to 2 buds on each spur, which is last year's shoot. And also with the new vines that we planted last spring, we're having to put vine shelters, like the little covers, down over the ones we had to cut back down to the ground.
Yeah.
Like we didn't cut them down to the ground, but close to the ground. And since we do have to spray to kill weeds in the vineyard to help the babies.
did we just lose the watcher?
No, it's just this thing always closes nowadays.
Oh, okay.
I think Google is trying to get rid of Hangouts,
Yeah.
and then for some reason it just acts up and does annoying stuff all the time now. So yeah,
We could connect to him with Zencaster. Then he would come in a lot clearer, but it would be kind of a pain.
there's no chat. Well, I guess there is a chat in there.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, just we're getting prepped for bud break, which is coming in like a month.
Yeah.
Or less than a month, a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks or something.
Yeah. Well, I finished the labeling and waxing
That's
of the
good.
bottles last week. And then I did an inspection of all the beehives. They are looking really good, in which I was, worried. Like over the winter, they can collapse or flee or be killed. None of that happened. They all look really healthy, and I'm looking forward to adding some hive boxes and supers to them mid-March, maybe late March, and giving them a chance to expand. And so maybe we'll be able to harvest some honey from at the end of the summer from some of them. We'll see.
That's cool.
We haven't reached swarming time yet. Some of them still may decide to leave. I'm still worried about that. I hope not, Anyway, I'm glad that they all survived the winter and things are looking good there.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Farming bees.
Yep. And I got a crypto update. Everything is down. Bitcoin is at $38,358.05. And Ethereum is at $2,674.46. So this is a buy time if you are into that kind of thing. For sure. That's the lowest it's been in a long time.
Yeah. Yep. That's actually it's a good opportunity.
Yep.
If it doesn't keep going down forever.
Right.
All right, so I've got a story here from phys.org. This is Astronomy and Space, Planetary Sciences, fingerprinting minerals to better understand how they are affected by meteorite collisions. So the article says, when a space rock survives the turbulent passage through Earth's atmosphere and strikes the surface, it generates shock waves that can compress and transform minerals on the planet's crust. Since these changes depend on the pressure produced upon impact, experts can use the features in Earth's minerals to learn about the meteorite's life story, from the moment of collision all the way back to the conditions from which the celestial bodies originate. Now that I'm interested to learn how, but anyway, if you compare an average mineral to one that's been involved in a meteoritic impact, you'll find some unique features in the shocked one, says Ariana Gleason, a scientist at the Department of Energy's SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory. On the outside, they retain some of their original...
Slackers.
Yeah. They retain some of their original crystalline form, but inside they become disordered and full of beautiful interlocking linear formations called lamellae. Lamellae? Lamellae. Don't know how to pronounce it.
Lam.
Plagioclase, the most abundant mineral in Earth's crust, which you said was a silicate rich mineral or something like that. Plagioclase is one of the most commonly used minerals for painting a fuller picture of meteoritic impacts. However, the pressure at which this mineral loses its crystalline shape and becomes disordered, and how this process called amorphization plays out, is the subject of ongoing debate.
Plagioclase is a type of feldspar that has two cleaving angles.
Okay.
It's common in igneous rocks.
It's a silicate, though.
Yes. Yeah.
Feldspar.
And let's see, lamella. Is that right?
Lamellae.
Let's see how it goes.
Lamella.
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 Lamella. Is that it? Roughly?
They spell it.
Because this is a thin layer or membrane or plate of tissue, especially in bone, or a membranous fold in a chloroplast.
It
It's
ends
in
with
botany.
AE.
Oh,
LLAE.
I did put in AE.
Well, anyway.
Okay.
Okay, so in a new experiment, SLAC researchers mimicked meteorite impacts in the lab to explore how plagioclase transforms during shock compression. They discovered that amorphization begins at pressures much lower than previously assumed. They also discovered that upon release, the material partially recrystallizes back into the original shape, demonstrating a memory effect that could potentially be harnessed for materials science applications. Their results, published today in Meteoritics and Planetary Science, could lead to more accurate models for learning about meteoritic impacts, including how fast meteors were traveling and the pressure they produced upon collision. Now, that I understand, but the beginning of the article said that the origins. So, I don't know.
And how can you tell how fast they were going? All it's about seems to me is inertia.
Kinetic, yeah.
And so
that's right.
that's a combination of how fast plus how much mass it has.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So it'd be difficult to determine what the mass was unless you had other data.
Yeah.
The development of new tools and techniques allows us to recreate these impacts in the lab to get new information and to see what's happening in even greater detail, says SLAC scientist Roberto Alonso Mori, who co-led the research. It really brings astronomy and planetary science right to our fingertips. Using the Matter in Extreme Conditions, or MEC, instrument at SLAC's LINAC Coherent Light Source, or LCLS, X-ray laser, the researchers struck a sample of plagioclase with a high-power optical laser to send a shockwave through it. As the shockwave traveled through the sample, the researchers hit the sample with ultra-fast X-ray laser pulses from LCLS at different points in time. Some of these X-rays then scattered into a detector and formed diffraction patterns. Just like every person has their own set of fingerprints, the atomic structure of each mineral is unique, says Gleason. Diffraction patterns.
Sounds like a positivist to me.
Diffraction patterns reveal that fingerprint, allowing us to follow how the sample's atoms rearranged in response to the pressure created by the shock wave. The researchers could also tune the optical laser to different energies to see how the diffraction pattern changed at different pressures. Our experiment allowed us to watch the amorphization as it actually happened, Alonso Mori says. We discovered that it actually starts at a lower pressure than we thought. We also found that the starting and ending fingerprints were very similar, giving us evidence of a memory effect in the material. It changes how we think about the different shock stages of these processes and will help us refine the models we use to understand these impacts.
I like that idea, that they want to see the changes taking place.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing where you're like, okay, here's the material before the impact, and then here's what it looks like afterwards.
Right.
But no, let's watch the shock waves propagate through the material and see what happens. See how big the process is and how many stages it has.
Yeah.
I like
cool.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And
to
of course,
close
they
it up,
use lasers. That's how
yeah, they got to use lasers.
giant
to create shock
X-ray
waves.
lasers.
Yeah. In follow-up experiments, the researchers plan to capture and analyze information about debris kicked up during the impacts. This would allow them to get a more complete picture of the impact and do side-by-side comparisons with what experts might find in the field to further improve models of meteoritic collisions. They also plan to explore other minerals and use more powerful lasers and larger volumes of material, which could provide insight into larger scale processes such as planet formation and larger lasers.
Yes, I approve of any science involving lasers.
That's cool. That's great that they're doing this. And the other thing I've noticed in the news feed is Hubble telescope. Have you been noticing this?
I've seen Hubble, yeah.
Yeah.
Has it taken over from James Webb?
Well, it just reminds me of this is the strategy, right? Like, remember let's see, what were they doing? I think it was some new scientific instrument that they employed that was all hyped up and everything. It's like, yeah, they got this new instrument and it's totally gonna replace these older instruments. Well, one of the older instruments that they were using to do the same type of research for whatever this was some kind of telescope in a jumbo jet that they would fly up real high into the stratosphere.
Okay.
And it was some kind of imaging device or whatever. Well, they decided to point it at the moon and do something totally different with it.
Yeah.
And they found water on the moon.
Right.
So it's like there's these massive teams of scientists that run these giant operations that get government money.
Yeah.
So Hubble has a huge team of people that are employed just to do that, to run that machine. Mm-hmm. And so, like, James Webb Telescope is now
put them
building
out of a job.
Yeah, and they're like, we're still useful. So it's like the next thing you see in the news feed after James Webb, it's like the Hubble people are like, we need to get news stories, and then so they're now I'm seeing all these, like, Hubble just discovered this interesting galaxy, and it was funny because the galaxy they were looking at was a ARP galaxy. So it was like two galaxies that are interacting.
Yeah.
And the name of the galaxies was ARP and then a number. And I'm like, they don't even mention the strangeness of this galaxy.
Right.
They're just like, look at how
looking
beautiful.
at one of the ARP catalog galaxies.
Yeah.
I also saw something about the largest galaxy ever discovered. Did you see something about that?
I don't think so. Was it Hubble? I bet it was.
It was probably Hubble. 13 million light years across or something. Like, it's enormous. Ours is like 100,000. And this thing is also ancient, so they're like, this completely changes everything we thought about galactic formation.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't see that story. I just find it's just interesting to see because you can tell where what the motivation is for this. It's like we got to get this information out on the presses to like make us still look like legitimate, so we can get more money next year from the government to keep going on this project. That's being replaced by a better one,
Yeah. What did Fort say? All of these pronouncements are doomed to be replaced by bigger and better telescopes and microscopes. And then pronounced as this is the new truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's weird though, right? Because there's plenty of smaller telescopes than the huge projects that are out there that still do good work.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of it's maybe they're not afraid of losing funding, but they could. I mean, the government has so much funding to put towards these things. I mean, but it was just like that jumbo jet one where they found water on the moon. It's like that instrument that's in the jumbo jet. Yeah, Sophia.
Thanks, Watcher. Now Watcher says that
No, he's here. I forget.
It was the Sophia telescope was in a Boeing 747.
Yeah. So they just decide to use Sophia for something that it's never been used for before.
Yeah.
To look into a crater on the moon and see if they can find water, and they make this big discovery. And it's like, this is...
Like, you should be doing this anyway.
Yeah, but they're trying to get funding because they've been...
So they're like what's low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, because the government's wanting to cut the funding for that because they're wanting to spend it on these better, newer technologies. So it's like they do this thing and they make this big discovery.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, well, let's give them some money.
Yeah. It is weird. It's how it happens these days.
And I did see another James Webb article where it's like they send you this image and it's, it's like 18 mirrors or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And they're all focused on a blurry star. And they're like, we're lining it up, folks.
Yeah.
We're testing the mirrors.
Didn't something go wrong with the deployment?
I don't know.
I can't remember.
I didn't even read the stories.
Yeah.
I was just like, there were so many of them in the news feed. I'm just like, no.
Yeah.
I guess that's dumb, but I don't know. For some reason, I'm just like, I'll wait until there's an image.
Yeah. Wait until it's illuminated. All right, let's tackle a couple of emails here. Let's do this donation one first, so you can pull that up too. We got a donation and an email from Edward. He says, I've listened to the majority of your podcasts. Very interesting and exceptionally funny. I live in Alberta and I travel a fair bit. I cannot drive through a river valley now without looking at the different layers of material in the walls. Missing 411 is cray-cray. So many people, I had no idea, keep spreading that word. I sent y'all some cash. Now get back to work. Thanks again from Ed. Oh, and the title is $50.
Yeah, so he's an associate executive producer of this show 232.
That's right.
Thank you, Edward.
Thank you, Edward. All right. This one is from James, a.k.a. Old Goat. And it's a quite long one called Regarding Giants. It says, greetings, snake friends. James, a.k.a. Old Goat, again. I come to make you aware, willing or not, that here in the great white north of Canada, we too have stories of giants and lost, or at least mysterious civilizations. I live on beautiful Vancouver Island. Contrary to most American perceptions, we here on this little paradise receive very little snow, perhaps 3 or 4 days a year, and can accumulate 2 meters or 6 feet of rainfall a year, and houses cost over $1 million. Anyways, as there is little in the way of pyramids or temples or mounds around here to investigate, although that story has changed slightly recently with some new discoveries being attributed to that pesky Clovis culture, we do have caves, old mines from the late gold rush era, and a very rich indigenous culture full of stories. In my digging into stories of lost treasure, mines, and other esoteric topics, I've come across many things, like stories of giants who killed entire tribes, giants who lived in large log houses in the rainforests and Spanish settlements, which is the standard model, however not well documented, and official accounts only claim occupation for around 150 years, from 1680 to 1870-ish. I believe this to be more since the fall of Tenochtitlan. But Spanish artifacts...
Tenochtitlan.
Yeah, Tenochtitlan. But Spanish artifacts are sporadically found by metal detectorists, and by chance, once in a while, where they shouldn't be. And the natives claim they were enslaved and forced to build monasteries and mine gold a long time ago. Where this mysterious monastery is, I may have an idea, but it's tied to other mysteries of Aztec gold and a carved cave full of such artifacts found in the 50s and lost again due to an untimely death of its discoverer. And an official expedition was mounted to search it out with the few clues provided, which failed. Some giant bones have been found, according to newspaper, and turned over to, you guessed it, the Smithsonian Institution. Other tales of standing stones lost to time and forest, giant fossilized turtles or tortoises the size of Volkswagen bugs, a genius Tesla-like mechanic who claimed to be abducted by and speaking to aliens, and actually built a scale model of the craft in his yard and went to meet the aliens on a mountain one night and disappeared. The charred remains of his truck were the only thing left. No body was ever recovered. I remember that story. He built himself an apartment that looks like a UFO in his yard. A few years ago, an article came out about a cave in the north of the island that was being investigated, and it contained what was said to be an ancient, sophisticated forge or smelter. What's interesting is that article quickly disappeared entirely when I went to follow up sometime later. Natives of this area had some small copper implements, but it wasn't something they had a lot of knowledge about, and mostly gave them to children to play with alongside of gold. Which leads us into the next mystery when gold rush pioneers came about. Towards the end of the primary rush up north to Yukon, many miners were surprised to find old mines and could not, by any accounts, figure out who had made them. Silver and copper mines left with ore and ancient tools. It wasn't the natives, but besides the more recent occupation of the Spanish, they claim large, bearded, red and blonde-haired men came in boats seeking metals and gold and such. There is a story of an eccentric fellow treasure seeker finding a cave with a smelter, I don't know if these are related, with charcoal paintings of what appeared to be bearded large men with long hair. With regard to lost treasure stories, I myself have tried to look for, quote, Mullard's Lost Tunnel of Leechtown, unquote, but it's a big effort as you must hike in brutal conditions, and I get hurt every time. By chance, I came across a fellow in a forum who claimed to be the son of a man who was with Mullard the day he found said cave of Spanish or Aztec gold. He cried superstitious stuff about losing an eye and hand to his efforts to look for it and outright refused to speak to me about it, but left me one possible additional clue I've yet to follow up on. With regard to sculptards, a funny local story about a stone carving found on a popular local beach near Victoria has made headlines when a carved Easter Island-like head was found by passersby and given to the local Royal BC Museum, which is as prestigious as it gets around here. They, the Skirps, investigated it and then claimed it to be several hundred years old and of native origin. They began the process of repossession by local tribes, and then suddenly some guy comes out and says, "Hey, that's my carving." And turns out some guy just spent his spare time carving heads for fun in soft stone on beaches and had done this. Done this one, he claims, only the summer before a bad storm came and washed it out, and he couldn't find it to finish it. The experts quickly backpedaled and produced many hilarious statements calling the man a hoaxer and a fraud, saying it was native. The man then produced evidence that he was indeed a carver and had many such pieces at his place of residence and sold some on occasion. I've rambled enough. Slither on, my friends. Slither on. From James. Lots of interesting stories there.
Cool stuff.
That's an interesting, kind of a reverse sculptard story. They find a Easter Island-looking carved stone head on a beach, and the Skirps are like, this is an ancient native artifact. And then this guy's like, no, I carve these all the time. I lost that one, though. And they're like, you're a hoaxer. This is bullshit. It's totally native. And then he shows, how he's actually carved a whole bunch of them, and he sells them, too. All right. That's all the emails I got.
All right. Well, get ready for what? Part 4?
It's part 4.
Part 4 of
The Book of the Damned.
Book of the Gosh Darn. Coming soon to a segment near you.
Snakes!
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, finally on time, as always. this week on Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Monday podcast resumes now that we're done with the mixing of the album. So the album will be coming out soon. We're not really sure still because we have a lot of work to do to prepare for that. But stay tuned. I'll keep you guys updated on that. Anyways, back to Book of the Damned.
Book of the Damned. Yeah, so I'll say a couple things before starting here, which I forgot to say last week. Number one, I'm not reading everything. So if you want to read the full book, you can get it. I have a Kindle version, but it's available in all kinds of formats. And then I'm also providing links to the Adult Brain or Grimerica version of the audiobook in the show notes. So if you want that, you can check the show notes for links to either buy it on Amazon or get the Audible version from Grimerica. Also, I've been reliably informed that Bath in England, which I pronounce B-A-T-H, I pronounced Bath, it's actually Boff. Boff.
Boff?
That's how you're supposed to say it. Yeah. Boff.
Of course. Yes.
B-A-A-F. F is how it's pronounced. Boff. So last week we finished up with a seeming cereal that fell in Wiltshire. It was enclosed in hailstones, some kind of wheat. And then the skirp said it was seeds of ivy berries dislodged from holes and chinks where birds had hidden them. That was the explanation for the wheat falling in hailstones. That it was it had been just dislodged seeds that birds had hidden in trees. And then Fort ends that with, if birds still hide ivy seeds and if winds still blow, I don't see why this phenomenon has not been repeated in more than 200 years since. Okay. In the monthly weather review, a correspondent writes that upon February the 16th, 1901 in Michigan, upon a day that was so calm that his windmill did not run, fell a brown dust that looked like vegetable matter. The editor of the review concludes that this was no widespread fall from a tornado because it had been reported from nowhere else. But rancidness, putridity, decomposition, a note that has been struck several times. But this condition seems to mean things lying around among the stars a long time. But we leave later to research the discussion of bacterial action and decomposition and whether bacteria could survive in what we call space, of which we know nothing. So again, Fort is speaking from a time in which he's right. We didn't know anything about space. So Dr. A.T. something writes that at London, Ontario, February 24th, 1868, in a violent storm, fell, with snow, a dark-colored substance, estimated at 500 tons, over a belt 50 miles by 10 miles. It was examined under a microscope by the doctor, who found it to consist mainly of vegetable matter, quote, far advanced in decomposition, unquote. The substance was examined by Dr. James Adams, who gave his opinion that it was the remains of cereals. So the other doctor points out that for months before this fall, the ground of Canada had been frozen, so that in this case, a more than ordinarily remote origin has to be thought of. He thinks the origin was to the south. However, he said, this is mere conjecture. So this stuff, cereal or some kind of grain or wheat, falls in February. And it is far advanced in decomposition. So the implication here being,
It wasn't frozen.
and there's no source of wheat unless it pulled it out of somebody's silo or something.
Yeah. But it's like a dust. It was ground dust, like flour or something.
Yeah. A dark-colored substance estimated at 500 tons over a belt 50 miles by 10 miles. They found it to consist mainly of vegetable matter far advanced in decomposition. It was examined again, who gave his opinion that it was the remains of cereals. And, of course, they point out that the ground of Canada had been frozen, so that it must have an remote origin.
It's the spaceships that are like, all right, this man is no good. Dump it.
Right. In March.
The mana ships are all flying around up there, and they haven't had a need for mana in a while.
Yeah, they're like, wow, no one needs mana. This stuff's going bad. Let's dump it in Canada. March 24th, 1840, during a thunderstorm at Rajkot in India, occurred a fall of grain. This was reported by Colonel Sykes of the British Association. The natives were greatly excited because it was of a grain of a kind unknown to them. And usually comes forward a scientist who knows more of the things than natives know. But it so happens that the usual thing was not done definitely in this instance. The grain was shown to some botanists who did not immediately recognize it, but it was thought to be either aspartium or a vicia. Chapter 6. Lead, silver, diamonds, glass. These sound like the accursed, but they're not. They're now of the chosen. That is, when they occur in metallic or stony masses that science has recognized as meteorites, we find that resistances to substances not so mixed in or incorporated. The fall of sulfur from the sky has been especially repulsive to the modern orthodoxy, largely because of its associations with the superstitions or principles of the preceding orthodoxy. Stories of devils, sulfurous exhalations. Several writers have said that they have had this feeling, so the scientific reactionists who have rapidly fought the preceding because it was the preceding, and the scientific prudes who, in sheer exclusionism, have held lean hands over pale eyes, denying falls of sulfur. But I have many notes upon the sulfurous odor of meteorites, and many notes upon the phosphorescence of things that come from externality. Someday I shall look over old stories of demons that have appeared sulfurously upon this earth, with the idea of expressing that we have often had undesirable visitors from other worlds, or that an indication of external derivation is sulfurousness. I expect someday to rationalize demonology, but just at present we are scarcely far enough advanced to go so far back. For a circumstantial account of a mass of burning sulfur...
he's basically right there in a nutshell. He's like, so eventually I'm going to write a show called Ancient Aliens.
That's right.
Or do a series of podcasts on UFOs.
And he does.
Demons.
He does, yeah. Okay. He does eventually do it. I think it might be in low. For a circumstantial account of a mass of burning sulfur about the size of a man's fist that fell in Poland in January 30th, 1868, upon a road where it was stamped out by a crowd of villagers. And they go and stamp it out. To see this account, you can find it in the Report of the British Association, 1874, page 272. The power of the exclusionists lies in that in their stand are combined both modern and archaic systematists. Falls of sandstone and limestone are repulsive to both theologians and scientists. Sandstone and limestone suggest other worlds upon which occur processes like geological processes, but limestone, as a fossiliferous substance, is of course especially of the unchosen. And I've wondered about this because we have, there's at least now, I don't know if at the time of Ford, he mentions much earlier in the book, we might have gone over this in part 1 or 2, that in his time, science had accepted the meteorites, but they are usually metallic.
Right, yeah.
But we now have there's a whole class of meteorites called carbonaceous chondrites,
right,
which is like a fancy space name for limestone.
I didn't know that.
I don't know if it's fossiliferous limestone or whatever, but yeah. Okay. In Science, March 9th, 1888, we read of a block of limestone said to have fallen near Middleburg in Florida. It was exhibited at the Subtropical Exposition at Jacksonville. The writer, in Science, denies that it fell from the sky. His reasoning is there is no limestone in the sky. Therefore, this limestone did not fall from the sky. Can't argue with that. Upon page 70 of Science Gossip in 1887, the editor says of a stone that was reported to have fallen in England that a sample had been sent to him. It was sandstone. Therefore, it had not fallen. It had been upon the ground in the first place. But upon page 140 in 1887 is an account, in Science Gossip in 1887, is an account of, quote, a large, smooth, water-worn, gritty sandstone pebble, unquote, that had been found in the wood of a full-grown beech tree. Looks to me as if it had fallen red hot, had penetrated the tree with high velocity, but I have never heard of anything falling red hot from a whirlwind. The wood around this sandstone pebble was black as if charred.
Man, it'd be crazy if there was like a big meteorite that was what is it? Carbonaceous chondrite?
Yeah.
And like broke it open and there's a giant footprint in it.
Oh, man.
That would be awesome.
Watcher, can you look that up? Carbonaceous chondrite or chondritic meteors and find out what the...
Tell us all about it.
Yeah. Dr. Farrington, for instance, in his books, does not even mention sandstone. However, the British Association, though reluctant, is less exclusive. Report of 1860, page 197. Substance about the size of a duck's egg that fell in Ireland June 9th, 1860. Date questioned. It is not definitely said that this substance was sandstone, but that it, quote, resembled friable sandstone. Friable meaning it crumbles easily. Falls of salt.
Seems like it wouldn't be a whole piece.
Yeah.
Unless, I mean, I guess if it was really big and it just
Yeah, it's a piece of something
smashed
bigger.
into tiny, tiny pieces.
Falls of salt have occurred often. They have been avoided by scientific writers because of the dictum that only water and not substances held in solution can be raised by evaporation. However, falls of salty water have received attention from Dalton and others and have been attributed to whirlwinds from the sea. This is so reasonably contested, quasi-reasonably, as to places not far from the sea, but the fall of salt that occurred high in the mountains of Switzerland. We could have predicted that that datum could be found somewhere. Let anything be explained in local terms of the coast of England, and then also it has occurred high in the mountains of Switzerland. All right, watchers posting stuff here. Carbonaceous chondrites are a class of chondritic meteorites comprising at least 8 known groups and many ungrouped. They include some of the most primitive meteorites. The C chondrites represent only a small proportion of meteorite falls. But that what is
C as in the letter C.
Yes. But what are they made of? That's the question. Carbonaceous is the clue there.
Yeah.
Okay. Large crystals of salt fell in a hailstorm in August 20th, 1870 in Switzerland. The orthodox explanation is a crime. Whoever made it should have had his fingerprints taken. We are told that these objects of salt, quote, came over the Mediterranean from some part of Africa, unquote. The hypnosis of the conventional, provided it be glib. One reads such an assertion, and provided it be suave and brief and conventional, one seldom questions or thinks very strange and then forgets. One has an impression from geography lessons. Mediterranean, not more than 3 inches wide on the map. Switzerland just a few more inches away. But these sizable masses of salt are described in the American Journal of Science as, quote, essentially imperfect cubic crystals of common salt, unquote. As to the occurrence with hail, that can, in 1 or 10 or 20 instances, be called a coincidence. Translation from a Turkish newspaper. A substance that fell December 2nd, 1883, described as an unknown substance in particles or flakes like snow. It was found to be saltish to the taste, and it dissolved readily in water. So I think his problem here with going back to the large crystals of salt in Switzerland, they're saying that it was carried from the Mediterranean over to Switzerland. But he's like, well, these are large salt crystals. So what process has to take place up in the sky after you pull salt water out of the Mediterranean for this to happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about the air at the beach, like when we go down to the Gulf of Mexico, the coast there. This, whatever the humidity of the air,
Yeah.
it coats the interior and exterior of the vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like, and I've heard it being described as salty air. I can't say that I've ever like wiped some off and tasted it, but I'm sure it's like you've got
That's vapor.
you've got the
It's like an aerosol or vapor.
well, but you've got the
Not vapor. It's
the waves washing up on the sand, soaking the sand, and then they wash away, and then the tide goes down, and then that sand is baked in the sun. So you have flakes of salt and crystals of salt in that sand.
Yeah.
And then the wind's blowing all the time, so I'm sure there's salt dust kicked up into the air, and then it gloms onto some piece of, the air is humid.
yeah.
So there's like ocean spray and all this kind of
Yeah, that's the thing is like
mist
you've
in
got
the air.
constant wind going across the spray action of the waves, and it's just carrying these tiny particles of actual salt water.
Yeah.
It's not evaporating.
And then it sticks all over your
Yeah.
vehicle.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that this can be whipped up into the stratosphere or whatever, into the sky by certain weather conditions. And then that salt, I guess, could be like a nucleus for hail or something maybe. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And it's interesting that it can be up there long enough to grow large crystals, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But hail baffles me in the same sense.
Yeah.
Like how do these, I've seen some pretty large chunks of hail
Yes.
falling. And I'm just like, how did it get that big
Yeah.
up there
Yep.
without falling?
And there have been plenty of reports of extremely large, baseball sized.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything that big, but they do fall.
Well, this past hail season, they had like ping pong ball size hail down south in Texas.
Yep. And there was one year that hail fell here, and it was like in long cubes. You remember that? It was falling, and they were
Cubes.
yeah, they were long rectangles.
Tangent cubes.
Yes. Okay. Where was I at here?
Yeah, kind of like I would imagine it falling in teardrop shapes, sort of,
Yeah.
aerodynamic shapes.
But it doesn't freeze in that way. It starts out as a tiny little, like a piece of sleet or something.
Yeah.
And it keeps getting blown
Tumbled
back
around
up and more
sticking to other ones.
Yeah, and so they form these weird shapes that have to do with whatever turbulence they're in, I
Yeah.
guess.
And man, they pile up fast when they come down.
Yeah. Watcher says he's seen and held golf ball sized hail. Okay. Miscellaneous.
So did you read this part that the watcher put up there? The carbonaceous chondrites are comprised of carbonaceous compounds.
Some contain organic compounds and inorganic silicates and diamond dust, as well as organic compounds. They are pre-solar silicates. So that would be pre-solar, meaning our sun is not making silicates, but other older stars that have since exploded. And presumably some of that material created was part of the nebula out of which our star formed. There were pre-solar silicates in it. Okay. Miscellaneous black capillary matter that fell November 16th, 1857 at Charleston in South Carolina. This is from the American Journal of Science. A fall of small, friable vesicular masses from the size of a pea to the size of a walnut. In January 18th, 1835 in England. Objects that fell in India at Peshawar, June 1893, during a storm. Substance that looked like crystallized niter. What's that? Niter. Another term for potassium nitrate. Niter. So the substance looked like crystallized niter, and it tasted like sugar. So I just want to... I want to bring attention to the fact that so many people taste these things. How often have we read these, strange, black, smelly mass fell, tasted good. Right? You're like, what?
Yeah.
I suppose, says Fort, sometimes deep sea fishes have their noses bumped by cinders. If their regions be subjacent to cunard or white star roots, they're especially likely to be bumped. White star would be a shipping line, so I assume the other one is as well. But I conceive of no inquiry. They're deep sea fishes. So again, we're going back to his analogy of we're a deep sea fishes.
Is this like a cinder? He says
cinder, like so
a piece of coal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
so
these
they're
ships are
dumping-
using coal and
Yeah.
they fall overboard sometimes, and these deep sea fishes, they bump their nose
their
into the
nose
cinder.
bumped
Yeah,
on.
but they make no inquiry because they are deep sea fishes.
Okay.
Or the slag of Slains, that it was a furnace product. The Reverend James Rust. Is this real? The Reverend James Rust seemed to feel bumped, and he tried in vain to arouse inquiry. Oh, okay, so Reverend Rust, gets obsessed with the slag of Slains. Of course he does. As to a report from Chicago, April 9th, 1879, that slag had fallen from the sky, Professor E.S. Bastian in the American Journal of Science says that the slag, quote, had been on the ground in the first place, unquote. It was furnace slag. Another quote, a chemical examination of the specimens has shown that they possess none of the characteristics of true meteorites. So isn't that interesting? He's got a preconception, right? That if it doesn't have characteristics of meteorites, then it was already on the ground.
Yeah.
It didn't fall. In 1855, a large stone was found far in the interior of a tree in Battersea Fields. Sometimes cannonballs are found embedded in trees. Doesn't seem to be anything to discuss. Doesn't seem discussable that anyone would cut a hole in a tree and hide a cannonball, which one could take to bed and hide under one's pillow just as easily. So with the stone of Battersea Fields, what is there to say except that it fell with high velocity and embedded in the tree? Nevertheless, there was a great deal of discussion, because at the foot of this tree, as if broken off the stone, fragments of slag were found. And Fort says he has 9 other instances of this.
But he calls it a cannonball. But he's just saying that's just a...
No, he says a large stone was found far in the interior of a tree, and then he just makes this analogy with sometimes we find cannonballs in trees. Okay. And why are cannonballs in trees? Because they were fired from a cannon.
Yeah.
And it got embedded in the tree.
Nobody cut
a hole in the tree to hide a cannonball. Okay. Right? He's trying to just make a connection here that the reason this rock was in the tree
I got it.
Surrounded by slag is because slag and cinders and ashes. And you won't believe, and neither will I, that they came from the furnace of vast aerial superconstructions. But we'll see what looks acceptable. As to ashes, the difficulties are great because we'd expect many falls of terrestrially derived ashes, volcanoes, and forest fires. I suppose that one of our main motives is to show that there is, in quasi-existence, nothing but the preposterous, or something intermediate to absolute preposterousness and final reasonableness, that the new is the obviously preposterous, that it becomes the established and disguisedly preposterous, that it is displaced after a while and is again seen to be the preposterous. Or that all progress is from the outrageous to the academic or sanctified, and then back to the outrageous, modified, however, by a trend of higher and higher approximation to the impreposterous.
This is the description of the manual, how the manual for the Universe Final Edition works.
Yeah.
First, the things are preposterous, and then they become the standard model. Then they're kicked out by the new preposterous that becomes the standard model.
Yeah, and they become outrageous again on the other side. That's right.
That's awesome. That's great.
Sometimes, Fort says, I feel a little more uninspired than at other times, but I think we're pretty well accustomed now to the oneness of allness, or that the methods of science in maintaining its system are as outrageous as the attempts of the damned to break in. In the annual record of science, 1875, a professor is quoted that ashes had fallen in the Azores and they had come from the Chicago fire.
Oh, that's cool. I'm looking at this chunk of black slag-looking stuff that History Shift sent me now with new fervor.
Oh, yes, that he found in the woods. Yeah. That's right.
Dude.
It has yet to be identified by any of the universities he sent it to. However, this special outrage was challenged. The editor of the record returns to it in the issue of 1876 and considers it, quote, in the highest degree improper to say that the ashes of Chicago landed in the Azores, unquote. Flake formations, which may signify passage through a region of pressure, are common, but spherical formations, as if of things that have rolled and rolled along planar regions somewhere, are commoner. Nature, January 10th, 1884, quotes a Kimberley newspaper that, toward the close of November, 1883, a thick shower of ashy matter fell at Queenston in South Africa. The matter was in marble-sized balls which were soft and pulpy, but which, upon drying, crumbled to the touch. The shower was confined to one narrow streak of land. It would be only ordinarily preposterous to attribute this substance to Krakatoa. But with the fall, loud noises were heard. And I'll omit many notes upon ashes if ashes should sift down upon deep-sea fishes. That is not to say that they came from steamships. In the Proceedings of the London Royal Society, Volume 19, there is an account of cinders that fell on the deck of a lightship in January 1873. In the American Journal of Science, there is a notice that the editor had received specimens of cinders said to have fallen in showery weather upon a farm near Ottawa in Illinois, January 17th, 1857. But after all, ambiguous things they are, cinders or ashes or slag or clinkers, the high priest of the accursed that must speak aloud for us is coal has fallen from the sky.
So real quick, going back to the thing that fell that they attributed to the Chicago fires.
Mm-hmm. The ashes.
Okay, it was ashes.
Ashes over the Azores.
Azores. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we're going through the fires on Cosmographia.
Yeah, why couldn't it have been the Michigan fires? Those were a lot closer, right? Sort of. I guess not a lot closer.
No, I mean, that's not a lot.
It's not a lot closer, but it's closer, isn't it?
It's still a long way away.
Yeah.
But the point is that we're looking at, I'm looking at these fires. I'm not going to put words in Randall's mouth, but that it's that we ran into some cloud of dust in the in space or something.
Gaseous dust. Yeah.
So yeah, that's cool that we should find out, see if there's any more data on that fall.
Yeah, we should. Let's see. He lists it.
Is there a reference or something we can go dig it up?
The Annual Record of Science, 1875, page 241. The Professor Debray is quoted that ashes had fallen in the Azores and they had come from the Chicago fire.
Just take a screenshot of that so we can look it up.
Okay. I will do that right now.
Try to find that source.
We're going to take a break.
Oh, yeah. It's break time, ladies and gents.
It is. All right.
We'll be right back.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, second hour, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and you are listening to Arabia. This is one of the not published ones.
And this is a little bit more than a doodle, I would say.
Yeah.
This is kind of a complete song.
So what's the deal? Maybe we'll publish
I actually made it for Cosmographia, and then Brad didn't like it, so I started using it on our show, and then he heard it again later, and he was like, he listened to an old show that I stuck it on. He was like, dude, we should use that. That's a great song. So I started using it for Cosmo again. But yeah.
It's definitely one of the ones we should publish in the Patreon feed.
Okay. Well, let's do it today.
Yeah, we can do that.
All right.
Okay, continuing on with the Book of the Gosh Darn It by Charles Fort. Dr. Angus Smith in the Literature and Philosophical Society of Manchester Memoirs says that about 1827, by the way, I'm having to make large amounts of guesses in the names of some of these journals because they're all abbreviated.
Okay.
The Lit and Phil Soak, which I assume is the Literature and Philosophical Society.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. He says that about 1827, like a great deal in Lyell's Principles and Darwin's Origin, this account is from hearsay. Something fell from the sky near Alport in England. Or Alport, I don't know.
Could also be the Litany of Philanthropy Socrates.
It could be.
Socrates.
So this thing fell luminously with a loud report and scattered into a field. A fragment that was seen by Dr. Smith is described by him as having, quote, the appearance of a piece of common wood charcoal, unquote. Nevertheless, the reassured feeling of the faithful upon reading this is burdened with data of differences. The substance was so uncommonly heavy that it seemed as if it had iron in it, and also there was a sprinkling of sulfur. This material is said by Professor Baden-Powell to be totally unlike that of any other meteorite. I forgot, we have got book report beers. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers. All right. I gotta be careful with that. I did want a book report beer, but I gotta be careful.
Yep.
So, Greg, in his catalog, in the Rept Brit Asak, or the Report of the British Association, calls it a more than doubtful substance. But again, against reassurance that is not doubt of authenticity. Greg says that it is like compact charcoal with particles of sulfur and iron pyrites embedded.
A doubtful substance.
A more than doubtful substance. But no doubt of authenticity or that it fell from the sky. So reassurances rise again, Professor Baden-Powell says. It contains also charcoal, which might perhaps be acquired from matter among which it fell. This is a common reflex with the exclusionists, that substances not truly meteoritic did not fall from the sky, but were picked up by truly meteoritic things, of course only on their surfaces, by impact with this earth. According to Dr. Smith, this substance was not merely coated with charcoal. His analysis gives 43.59% carbon.
So in the beginning of the book, they didn't believe that things fell from the sky.
Yeah.
The scientific community. Then they finally accept it, but then they think it's only metal and
Metals.
stuff.
Yeah.
So are we still in this period where they're not thinking that anything but metals fall from the sky? That's why they have an issue with,
I think so,
carbon-rich materials falling from the sky?
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Farrington, except with a brief mention, ignores the whole subject of the fall of carbonaceous matter from the sky. Proctor, in all of his books that I have read, is in books about as close as we can get to the admission that carbonaceous matter has been found in meteorites in very minute quantities. Or my own suspicion is that it is possible to damn something else only by losing one's own soul. That the substance that fell at the Cape of Good Hope resembled a piece of anthracite coal more than anything else. But this is a mistake, I think. The resemblance is to bituminous coal. But it is from the periodicals that we must get our data. To the writers of books upon meteorites, it would be as wicked, by which we mean departure from the characters of an established species, quasi-established, of course, to say that coal has fallen from the sky as would be to something in a barnyard a temptation that it climb a tree and catch a bird. And if over and over we shall learn of masses of soft coal that have fallen upon this earth, if in no instance has it been asserted that the masses did not fall, but were upon the ground in the first place, if we have many instances this time, we turn down good and hard the mechanical reflex that these masses were carried from one place to another in whirlwinds, because we find it too difficult to accept that whirlwinds could so select or so specialize in a peculiar substance. Another exclusionist was Professor Lawrence Smith. His psychotropism was to respond to all reports of carbonaceous matter falling from the sky by saying that this damned matter had been deposited upon things of the chosen by impact with this earth. Most of our data antedate him, or were contemporaneous with him, or were as accessible to him as to us. In his attempted positivism, it is simply and beautifully disregarded that, according to Berthelot, Berzelius, Cloez, Wohler, and others, that these masses are not merely coated with carbonaceous matter, but are carbonaceous throughout, or are permeated throughout. How anyone could so resolutely and dogmatically and beautifully and blindly hold out would puzzle us, were it not for our acceptance that only to think is to exclude and include, and to exclude some things that have as much right to come in as have the included, that to have an opinion upon any subject is to be a Lawrence Smith, because there is no definite subject.
God, I just do not understand what he's trying to say. Like, why did he write it so,
I don't know.
like, puzzling? I don't know. It's like, let me see how I can say this in a way that no one will understand the point.
Yeah. Well, basically what we're getting at with this whole paragraph is that this guy, Professor Lawrence Smith, is just, despite all the data that is available to Fort and to him, and that many other scientists have acknowledged, he still is just holding out that the only way that the carbon is in these things is basically burned onto them by impact.
Okay.
He just puts it in this, like, he just goes on and on about it.
Yeah. I almost thought he was saying it was the other way around, like the way he put it. I was like, okay, so the guy is holding out that it is like part of the material.
No, it's the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's saying that all these other scientists are saying, like, they're not merely coated, but they're carbonaceous throughout. And this one guy is just, despite all of that,
Okay.
is holding on to this idea. So Dr. Walter Flight says that of the substance that fell in France, March 15th, 1806, that it, quote, emits a faint bituminous substance when heated, according to the observations of Berzelius and a commission appointed by the French Academy. This time we have not the reluctances expressed in such words as like and resembling. We are told that this substance is an earthy kind of coal. So they're not saying, well, it's kind of like coal or it's resembles coal. No, this is coal in this particular report. Carbonaceous matter that fell in 1840 in Tennessee, also in Australia in 1861, in France, 1864. 20 masses here, some of them as large as a human head, of a substance that resembled a dull-colored earthy lignite, which is coal again, I think. Let me look that real quick. Yeah, a soft brownish coal showing traces of plant structure. So lignite, you can actually sometimes see fossils in it.
Huh.
According to M. Debris, the substance that fell in the Argentine Republic, quote, resembled certain kinds of lignite and boghead coal. It is said that this mass fell on June 30th, 1880 in the province of Entre Rio in Argentina, and that it is, quote, like brown coal, that it resembles all the other carbonaceous masses that have fallen from the sky. And then something that fell in France in August 10th, 1885, and when it burned, it gave out a bituminous odor. And there's a carbonaceous substance that fell at Rajpunta in India in 1911. It was very friable, so crumbly. 50% of it was soluble in water. And a combustible carbonaceous substance that fell with sand in Naples, March 14th, 1818. So he's just listing a bunch of these things. And this particular one fell with sand.
All right, who's going to taste a piece of this rock? That history shift
Taste a
found.
piece of the history shift coal.
Taste a piece of it, and then we'll burn some and smell it. It has no smell right now.
Right, but if we lit it on fire, it would probably have a smell.
Yeah, and it looks like it could burn.
It does.
We'll have
We
to
should
test
do
that.
it.
Yeah.
That in June 9th, 1889, a very friable substance of a deep greenish black fell in Russia. It contained 5% organic matter, which, when powdered and digested in alcohol, yielded, after evaporation, a bright yellow resin. This mass was 2% of an unknown mineral.
So we crush this thing up too. We can crush a piece up into powder and then put it in alcohol.
Yeah, and then let the alcohol evaporate and see what's left.
Okay. All right. That's happening.
Yeah, that's definitely going to happen.
Let me get my mortar and pestle.
Cinders and ashes and slag and coke and charcoal and coal. Reluctances and the disguises or covered retreats of such words as like and resemble, or that conditions of intermediateness forbid abrupt transitions, but that the spirit animating all intermediateness is to achieve abrupt transitions, because if anything could finally break away from its origin and environment, that would be a real thing, something not merging away indistinguishably from the surroundings. So all attempt to be original, all attempt to invent something that is more than mere extension or modification of the preceding, is positivism. Or that if one could conceive of a device to catch flies, positively different from or unrelated to all other devices, up he'd shoot to heaven. Or the positive absolute, leaving behind such an incandescent train that in one age it would be said that he had gone aloft in a fiery chariot, and in another age that he had been struck by lightning. By the way, I looked this up. I just decided I would look up positivist. And there is a philosophical, positivism. A philosophical system that holds that every rationally justifiable assertion can be scientifically verified or is capable of logical or mathematical proof, and that therefore rejects metaphysics and theism. That's a positivist.
All right.
So yes.
So he's not making up words.
No, in this case, it's, I mean, I think he is using it in his own way, but yeah, the positivist is a thing. Yeah. Okay. So he's talking about a positive absolute, and this person would shoot up to heaven in a fiery chariot. And Fort says, I'm collecting notes upon persons supposed to have been struck by lightning.
He uses that as a segue.
Yeah. I think that high approximation to positivism has often been achieved. Instantaneous translation. The residue of negativeness left behind, looking much like the effects of a stroke of lightning. So that's tongue in cheek for sure. I've been collecting notes on people who have been struck by lightning. I'm pretty sure they were all positivists who achieved perfect positivism.
That's great.
With many of our data of coal that has fallen from the sky as accessible then as they are now, and with the scientific pronouncement that coal is fossil, how, in a real existence, by which we mean a consistent existence, or a state in which there is real intelligence, or a form of thinking that does not indistinguishably merge away with imbecility, could there have been such a row as that which was raised about 40 years ago over Dr. Hahn's announcement that he had found fossils in meteorites? What was accessible to anybody at that time in the Philosophical Magazine, Volume 4, that the substance that fell at Kaba in Hungary, April 15th, 1857, contained organic matter analogous to fossil waxes, or limestone. Of the block of limestone which was reported to have fallen at Middleburg in Florida, it is said that although something had been seen to fall in an old cultivated field, the witnesses who ran to it picked up something that, quote, had been upon the ground in the first place, unquote. The writer who tells us this, with the usual exclusion imagination known as stupidity, but unjustly because there is no real stupidity, thinks he can think of a good-sized stone that had, for many years, been in a cultivated
field.
Yeah, in a cultivated field, but that had never been seen before. And it never interfered with plowing, for instance. He is earnest and unjarred when he writes that this stone weighed 200 pounds.
Oh, my God.
My own notion, founded upon my own experience in seeing, is that a block of stone weighing 500 pounds might be in one's parlor for 20 years, virtually unseen, but not in an old cultivated field where it interfered with plowing. Dr. Hahn said that he had found fossils in meteorites. There is a description of the corals, sponges, shells, and crinoids, all of them microscopic, which he photographed in Popular Science. Dr. Hahn was a well-known scientist, but he was better known after that. Anybody may theorize upon other worlds and conditions upon them that are similar to our own conditions. If his notions be presented undisguisedly as fiction, or only as interesting hypothesis, he'll stir up no prude rages. But Dr. Hahn said definitely that he had found fossils in specified meteorites. Also, he published photographs of them. His book is in the New York Public Library. In the reproductions of every feature of some of the little shells is plainly marked. If they're not shells, neither are things under an oyster counter. The striations are very plain. One sees even the hinges where bivalves were joined. Professor Lawrence Smith, in Knowledge, Volume 1, says, Dr. Hahn is a kind of half-insane man whose imagination has run away with him. So this is the conservation of continuity. Then Dr. Wineland examined Dr. Hahn's specimens, and he gave his opinion that they are fossils and that they are not crystals of instatite, as asserted by Professor Smith, who had never seen them.
So it is conceivable. It is conceivable that we've had some major impacts on the planet when there were already shell fossils here. Mm-hmm. So they would have been thrown into space in some cases.
Yeah.
And they could fall back down many millions or however many.
That's a good point.
Millions of years later.
Yeah. They don't have to be space fossils.
They don't have to be from another world.
Yeah.
But they could be. I'm not saying that they couldn't be, but it seems like, I've heard of this and then it's been debunked and all this kind of stuff. No, but then they find, then they're saying like, well, we found precursors to like organic proteins or proteins and stuff in these meteorites. But it's just strange that they wouldn't consider, well, maybe it actually did come from here. It did go up and then come back down later.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so you're one of those. First up and then back down.
But if he's, he ought to consider that too, right? If he's, it doesn't have to be whirlwinds.
Yeah. Up from one place and down in another.
That's right. But even if it did come from another world, it had to go up from one place.
Yes.
So.
Yes,
I will
place
say
just
that I am up from one place and down in another.
That place just had a different down.
That's right. Well, you say down in another.
Right.
So.
Yes, I guess what you're saying is if we go universal, then everything is up from one place and down in another.
That's
yeah,
right.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. But I also want to point out here this thing with Professor Lawrence Smith and Dr. Hahn, the guy who says he found fossils and meteorites, that Fort is pointing out that Dr. Wineland examined the specimens from Dr. Hahn and gave his opinion that they were fossils, despite this scriptard or debunker, Professor Lawrence Smith, who asserted that they were just crystals, but he had never looked at them himself.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, isn't that classic? Yeah. Like we see this, these people make pronouncements on stuff, on evidence that they have never examined themselves. It seems to show a kind of bias that they don't care to examine the evidence. They're like, those are just crystals and he's just mistaken.
Yeah.
The damnation of denial and the damnation of disregard. After the publication of Dr. Wineland's findings, there was silence. Chapter 7. The living things that have come down to this earth. Attempts to preserve the system. That small frogs and toads, for instance, never have fallen from the sky, but were on the ground in the first place, or that there have been such falls, but they were up from one place in a whirlwind and down in another. Where there is some especially froggy place near Europe, as there is an especially sandy place, the scientific explanation would, of course, be that all small frogs falling from the sky in Europe come from this center of frogidity. To start with, I'd like to emphasize something that I am permitted to see because I am still primitive, or intelligent, or in a state of maladjustment. That there is not one report findable of a fall of tadpoles from the sky. In Leisure Hours, Volume 3, page 779, for accounts of small frogs or toads, is said to have been seen to fall from the sky. The writer says that all observers were mistaken, that the frogs or toads must have fallen from trees or other places overhead. A tremendous number of little toads, 1 or 2 months old, that were seen to fall from a great thick cloud that appeared suddenly in a sky that had been cloudless. August 1804, near Toulouse in France, according to a letter from Professor Pontus to M. Arago. Many instances of frogs that were seen to fall from the sky in Notes and Queries, and he lists multiple volumes here, and multiple accounts of such falls signed by witnesses. Scientific American, July 12, 1873. A shower of frogs which darkened the air and covered the ground for a long distance is the reported result of a recent rainstorm in Kansas City, in Missouri. As to have been there in the first place, there were little frogs found in London after a heavy storm, July 30th in 1838. Also, little toads found in a desert after a rainfall. Harder to say those have been there in the first place. They're in a desert. To start with, I do not deny positively the conventional explanation of up and down. I think that there may have been such occurrences. I omit many notes that I have upon indistinguishables. In the London Times, July 4th, 1883, there is an account of a shower of twigs and leaves and tiny toads in a storm upon the slopes of the... I don't know. I think it's a mountain chain in France. Let's see. Apennines, maybe is how you say it. These may have been the ejecta of a whirlwind. I add, however, that I have notes upon 2 other falls of tiny toads in 1883, one in France and one in Tahiti, and also of fish in Scotland. But the phenomenon of the Apennines, the mixture, seems to me to be typical of the products of a whirlwind. In other words, leaves and sticks and twigs and toads. Mm-hmm. The other instances seem to me to be typical of something like migration. Their great numbers and their homogeneity. Over and over in these annals of the damned occurs the datum of segregation. But a whirlwind is thought of as a condition of chaos, quasi-chaos, not final negativeness, of course. Monthly Weather Review, July 1881. A small pond in the track of the cloud was sucked dry, the water being carried over the adjoining fields together with a large quantity of soft mud, which was scattered over the ground for half a mile around. So it is so easy to say that small frogs that have fallen from the sky have been scooped up by a whirlwind, but here are the circumstances of a scoop. In the exclusionist imagination, there is no regard for mud or debris from the bottom of a pond or floating vegetation or loose things from the shore, but a precise picking out of frogs only. Of all instances I have that attribute the fall of small frogs or toads to whirlwinds, only one definitely identifies or places the whirlwind, and also as has been said before, a pond going up would be quite as interesting as frogs coming down. Whirlwinds we read of over and over, but where and what whirlwind? It seems to me that anybody who had lost a pond would be heard from.
Yes.
In Simmons' Meteorological Magazine, a fall of small frogs near Birmingham in England, July 30th, 1892, is attributed to a specific whirlwind, but not a word as to any special pond that had contributed. And something that strikes my attention here is that these frogs are described as almost white. Huh. So again, I'll remind, back in the anomalies episodes, the frogs that were stuck in stone or found in wood, they all, and the other animals, they start out as being like white and they're not alive. But then after exposure, they suddenly change color to slowly turn green or whatever their natural color is, brown, and then they start slithering or hopping or crawling away. So Ford says, I'm afraid there is no escape for us. We shall have to give to civilization upon this earth some new worlds, places with white frogs in them. Upon several occasions, we have had data of unknown things that have fallen from somewhere. But something not to be overlooked is that if living things have landed alive upon this earth, in spite of all we think we know of the accelerated velocity of falling bodies, and have propagated, why the exotic becomes the indigenous, or from the strangest of places we'd expect the familiar, or if hosts of living frogs have come here from somewhere else, every living thing upon this earth may ancestrally have come from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. There are white frogs.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't know about white frogs back then.
But when white frogs turn green when they hop away, it's a different thing.
I wonder if the white frogs could change colors.
Yeah. And so they're white because they're in a cloud, right? And then they fall to the ground. They're like, oh, I'm on grass now.
I need to be brown or
change green. So yes, this last paragraph that I just read, this is getting closer to like the ideas that I like, as opposed to like, giant spacefaring cargo vessels. But I guess that makes sense if it's coal and I don't know. But this idea that if we have falls of living things on the earth that then hop off into the ecosystem and continue to live and propagate.
Yeah.
that this may have implications for every living thing on the planet.
Yeah.
After one of the greatest hurricanes in the history of Ireland, some fish were found as far as 15 yards from the edge of a lake. But here, have another. This is a good one for the exclusionists. A fall of fish in Paris said that a neighboring pond had been blown dry. Date not given, but I have seen it recorded somewhere else. The best known fall of fishes from the sky is that which occurred at Mountain Ash in the valley of, in Glamorganshire, I don't know, February 11th, 1859. The editor of the Zoologist, having published a report of a fall of fishes, writes, I am continually receiving similar accounts of frogs and fishes. But in all the volumes of the Zoologist, I can find only 2 reports of such falls. There is nothing to conclude other than that hosts of data have been lost because orthodoxy does not look favorably upon such reports.
Yeah. Yeah, that sucks.
The Monthly Weather Review records several falls of fishes in the United States, but accounts of these reported occurrences are not findable in other American publications. Nevertheless, the treatment by the Zoologist of the fall reported from Mountain Ash is fair. First appears in the issue of 1859 a letter from the
It says zoologist.
Zoologist? Am I saying it wrong? A letter from the Reverend John Griffith, vicar of Aberdare, asserting that the fall had occurred chiefly upon the property of Mr. Nixon of Mountain Ash. On page 6,540, Dr. Gray of the British Museum, bristling with exclusionism, writes that some of these fishes, which had been sent to him alive, were very young minnows. He says, on reading the evidence, it seems to me the most probably only a practical joke, that one of Mr. Nixon's employees had thrown a pail full of water upon another, who then thought that fish in it had fallen from the sky. Those fishes, still alive, were exhibited at the Zoological Gardens in Regent's Park. The editor says that one was a minnow and that the rest were sticklebacks. I looked this up. Stickleback is just what it sounds like. A small fish with sharp spines on its back. Able to live in both salt and fresh water.
I thought it was a band.
Stickleback. Found in freshwater and saltwater in Eurasia and North America. He says that Dr. Gray's explanation is no doubt right. But on page 6,564, he publishes a letter from another correspondent who apologizes for opposing so high an authority as Dr. Gray, but says that he had obtained some of these fishes from persons who lived at a considerable distance apart and considerably out of the range of a playful pail of water. According to the Annual Register, 1859, the fishes themselves had fallen by pailfuls. If these fishes were not upon the ground in the first place, we base our objections to the whirlwind explanation on 2 data. That they fell in no such distribution as one could attribute to the discharge of a whirlwind, but upon a narrow strip of land about 80 yards long and 12 yards wide. The other datum is again the suggestion that at first seems so incredible, but for which support is piling up, a suggestion of a stationary source overhead. Because 10 minutes later, another fall of fishes occurred on this same narrow strip of land. Even arguing that a whirlwind may stand still, it discharges tangentially. Wherever the fishes came from, it does not seem thinkable that some could have fallen and that others could have whirled even a tenth of a minute, then falling directly after the first to fall. Because of these evil circumstances, the best adaptation was to laugh the whole thing off and say that someone had soused someone else with a pail full of water in which a few very young minnows had been caught. In the London Times, March 2nd, 1859, there is a letter from Mr. Aaron Roberts, curate of St. Peter's in Carmarthen. In this letter, the fishes are said to have been about 4 inches long, but there is some question of species, I think. There is some question of species. I think myself that they were minnows and sticklebacks. Some persons, thinking them to be sea fishes, placed them in salt water, according to Mr. Roberts, and the effect is stated to have been almost instantaneous death. Some were placed in fresh water, and these seemed to thrive. As to narrow distribution, we are told that the fishes fell in and about the premises of Mr. Nixon. It was not observed at the time that any fish fell in any other part of the neighborhood, save in the particular spot mentioned. But in the London Times, March 10th, Vicar Griffith writes an account that the roofs of some houses were covered with them. In this letter, it is said that the largest fishes were 5 inches long and that these did not survive the fall.
Look at this fish fall graph.
Is that from Stickleback?
That's from Stickleback. Every time the scriptards do, they laugh. We got to take a break.
Yeah.
All right. Stay tuned for more Stickleback. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, for the final segment, the final hour here on Brothers of the Serpent podcast, Book of the Damned. And this is a alternate instrumental from the song Our Immortality, which is coming out on the $50 Dynasty album Procession soon, at some point in the near distant future.
Okay. So yeah, the last thing was largest fishes were 5 inches long and that these did not survive the fall, and that some were found on roofs of houses. The evidence of the fall of fish on this occasion was very conclusive. A specimen of the fish was exhibited and found to be the Gasterosteus leiarius. This is the stickleback. Altogether, I think we have not a sense of total perdition when we're damned with the explanation that someone soused someone else with a pail full of water, in which were thousands of fishes 4 or 5 inches long, some of which covered roofs of houses, and some of which remained 10 minutes in the sky. By way of contrast, we offer our own acceptance that the bottom of a supergeographical pond had dropped out. I have a great many notes upon the fall of fishes, despite the difficulty these records have in getting themselves published. But I pick out the instances that especially relate to our supergeographical acceptances, or to the principles of supergeography, or data of things that have been in the air longer than acceptably could a whirlwind carry them, that have fallen with a distribution narrower than is attributable to a whirlwind, or that have fallen for a considerable length of time upon the same narrow area of land. But so impressed are we with the datum that, though there have been many reports of small frogs that have fallen from the sky, not one report of a fall of tadpoles is findable, that to these circumstances another adjustment must be made. An extraordinary observation is the fall of living things without injury to them. The devotees of Sir Isaac explain that they fall upon thick grass and they survive. But Sir James Emerson Tenout, in his History of Celion, tells of a fall of fishes upon gravel by which they were seemingly uninjured. A psychotropism that arises here, disregarding serial significance or mechanical, unintelligent, repulsive reflex, is that the fishes of India did not fall from the sky, that they were found upon the ground after torrential rains because streams had overflowed and then receded. In the region of inertness that we think we can conceive of, or a zone that is to this Earth's gravitation very much like the neutral zone of a magnet's attraction, we accept that there are bodies of water and also clear spaces, bottoms of ponds dropping out, very interesting ponds having no earth at the bottom, vast droplets of water afloat in what is called space, fishes and deluges of water falling. But also other areas in which fishes, however they got there, a matter we'll consider, remain and dry or even putrefy, and then sometimes falling by atmospheric dislodgement. After a tremendous deluge of rain, one of the heaviest falls on record, listed in All the Year Round, Volume 8, at Rajkot in India, July 25th, 1850, the ground was found literally covered with fish. The word found is agreeable to the repulsions of the conventionalists and their concept of an overflowing stream, but according to Dr. Buist, some of these fishes were found on the tops of haystacks.
Is he really saying fishes?
Fishes is what he says most often, yeah. Okay. Fishes.
Is that... okay.
Should I look it up? Yep. It doesn't give me a plural of it.
Yeah.
Fishes. But he's quoting that. That's a direct quote from the journal. Farrell, in a popular treatise, page 414, tells of a fall of living fishes, some of them having been placed in a tank where they survived, that occurred in India about 20 miles south of Calcutta on September 20th, 1839. A witness of this fall says, "The most strange thing which ever struck me was that the fish did not fall helter-skelter, or here and there, but they fell in a straight line, not more than a cubit in breadth."
Whoa.
It is weird.
What's going on?
In the American Journal of Science, or Amer Sci, that according to testimony taken before a magistrate, a fall occurred February 19th, 1830, in India, of many fishes of various sizes, some whole and fresh, and others, quote, mutilated and putrefying, unquote.
What was the Indian doing using cubits to measure?
I don't know. Our reflex to those who would say that in the climate of India, it would not take long for fishes to putrefy is that high in the air, the climate of India is not torrid. Another peculiarity of this fall is that some of the fishes were much larger than others. Or, to those who hold out for segregation in a whirlwind, or that objects, say, twice as heavy as others, would be separated from the lighter, we point out that some of these fishes were twice as heavy as others. In the Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, Volume 2, depositions of witnesses are given. Some of the fish were fresh, but others were rotten and without heads. And among the number which I got, 5 were fresh and the rest were stinking and headless.
Wow.
According to Dr. Buist, some of these fishes weighed 1.5 pounds each and others 3 pounds.
Wow.
Then there was a fall of fishes at Futtapur in India, May 16th, 1833. And they were all dead and dry. And that's a quote from Dr. Buist.
Dead and dry.
A correspondent writes from the Dove Marine Laboratory in England that at Hindon, a suburb of Sunderland, August 24th, 1918, hundreds of small fishes, identified as sand eels, had fallen. And again, the same small area, 60 by 30 yards. The fall occurred during a heavy rain that was accompanied by thunder or indications of disturbance aloft, but by no visible lightning. The sea is close to Hindon, but if you try to think of these fishes having described a trajectory in a whirlwind from the ocean, consider this remarkable datum, that, according to witnesses, the fall upon this small area occupied 10 minutes. So I cannot think of a clearer indication of a direct fall from a stationary source. And, quote, the fish were all dead, and indeed stiff and hard when picked up immediately after the occurrence, unquote. By all of which I mean that we have only begun to pile up our data of things that fall from a stationary source overhead. We'll have to take up the subject from many approaches before our acceptance, which seems quite as rigorously arrived at as has ever been a belief can emerge from the accursed. I don't know how much the horse in the barn will help us to emerge, but if ever anything did go up from this earth's surface and stay up, those damned things may have. Remember the horse in the barn that was mentioned?
That he said he shouldn't mention that yet?
Right. So I guess these didn't fall back down. Monthly Weather Review, May 1878. In a tornado in Wisconsin, May 23rd in 1878, a barn and a horse were carried completely away, and neither horse nor barn, nor any portion of either, has been since found. After that, which would be a little strong were it not for a steady improvement in our digestions that I note as we go along, there is little of the bizarre or the unassimilable in the turtle that hovered 6 months or so over a small town in Mississippi. Monthly Weather Review, May 1894. That, May 11th, 1894, at Vicksburg in Mississippi fell a small piece of alabaster, and then in Bovina, 8 miles from Vicksburg, fell a gopher turtle, and they fell in a hailstorm. So when I was going through this part, I read this multiple times, and I'm trying to figure out, why does he think it was up in the air for 6 months? And I haven't been able to figure that out yet. The editor of the review says, quote, an examination of the weather map shows that these hailstorms occur on the south side of a region of cold northerly winds and were but a small part of a series of similar storms. Apparently some special local whirls or gusts carried heavy objects from this Earth's surface up to the cloud regions, unquote. Of all incredibilities that we have to choose from, I give first place to a notion of a whirlwind pouncing upon a region and scrupulously selecting a turtle and a piece of alabaster. This time, the other mechanical thing there in the first place cannot rise in response to its stimulus. It is resisted in that these objects were coated with ice in the month of May in a southern state. If a whirlwind at all, there must have been very limited selection, but there is no record of the fall of other objects. But there is no attempt in the review to specify a whirlwind. These strangely associated things were remarkably separated. They fell 8 miles apart. Then, as if there were real reasoning, they must have been high to fall with such divergence, or one of them must have been carried partly horizontally 8 miles farther than the other. But either supposition argues for power more than that of a local whirl or gust, or argues for a great specific disturbance of which there is no record for the month of May in 1894. Nevertheless, as if I really were reasonable, I do feel that I have to accept that this turtle has been raised from this Earth's surface somewhere near Vicksburg, because this gopher turtle is common in the southern states. Or that things can go up so high in hurricanes that they will stay up indefinitely, but may, after a while, be shaken down by storms. Over and over, we have noted the occurrence of strange falls in storms. So then that the turtle and the piece of alabaster may have had far different origins, from different worlds perhaps, and have entered a region of suspension over this earth, wafting near each other, long duration, final precipitation by atmospheric disturbance with hail, or that hailstones too, when large, are phenomena of suspension of long duration, that it is highly unacceptable that the very large ones could become so great only in falling from the clouds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like they start. Like what you were saying is they start out as little dots and then they get whirled around, but at some point they get so big that they
fall through. Yeah,
and then they just accumulate more specks on the way down.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. The idea is that they're continually pushed back up, but eventually they get so heavy that process can't keep them up there.
It's just crazy to think how.
So the stuff that falls down is sorted by this process.
Yeah.
But a turtle covered in ice?
I know. So strange.
It would.
It would only seem plausible if the other hailstones were the same size as the turtle plus ice.
Right. Yeah. Or weight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Over and over has the note of disagreeableness or of putrefaction been struck. Long duration and other indications of long duration. I think of a region somewhere above this Earth's surface in which gravitation is inoperative and is not governed by the square of the distance, quite as magnetism is negligible at a very short distance from a magnet. Theoretically, the attraction of a magnet should decrease with the square of the distance, but the falling off is found to be almost abrupt at a short distance. I think that things raised from this Earth's surface to that region have been held there until shaken down by storms. The Super Sargasso Sea. This is what he calls this theoretical region up in the sky. Derelicts, rubbish, old cargoes from interplanetary wrecks, things cast out into what is called space by convulsions of other planets, things from the times of the Alexanders, the Caesars and the Napoleons, of Mars and Jupiter and Neptune, things raised by this Earth's cyclones, horses and barns and elephants and flies and dodos and moas and pterodactyls, leaves from modern trees and leaves from the Carboniferous era. All, however, tending to disintegrate into homogeneous-looking muds of dusts or red or yellow or black, treasure troves for the paleontologists and for the archaeologists, accumulations of centuries, cyclones of Greece and Egypt and Assyria, fishes dried and hard, there a short time, others long enough to putrefy. But the omnipresence of heterogeneity, or living fishes, also ponds of fresh water and oceans of salt water. As to the law of gravitation, I prefer to take one simple stand. Orthodoxy accepts the correlation and equivalence of forces. Gravitation is one of these forces. All other forces have phenomena of repulsion and of inertness, irrespective of distance, as well as attraction. But Newtonian gravitation admits attraction only. Then, Newtonian gravitation can be only 1/3 acceptable even to the orthodox, or there is denial of the correlation and equivalence of forces. Or, still simpler, here are the data. Make what you will yourself of them. In our intermediatist revolt against homogeneous or positive explanations, or our acceptance that the all-sufficing cannot be less than universality, besides which, however, there would be nothing to suffice. Our expression upon the Super Sargasso Sea, though it harmonizes with data of fishes that fall as if from a stationary source, and of course with other data too, it is inadequate to account for two peculiarities of the falls of frogs, that never has a fall of tadpoles been reported, and never has a fall of full-grown frogs been reported. Always frogs only a few months old. But tadpoles would be more likely to fall from the sky than would frogs, little or big, if such falls be attributed to whirlwinds, and more likely to fall from the Super Sargasso Sea if, though very tentatively and provisionally, we accept this Super Sargasso Sea. Before we take up an especial expression upon the fall of immature and larval forms of life on this earth, and the necessity then of conceiving of some factor besides mere stationariness or suspension or stagnation, there are other data that are similar to data of falls of fishes. Science Gossip, 1886, page 238. That small snails of a land species had fallen near Cornwall, July 8th, 1886, during a heavy thunderstorm. Roads and fields were strewn with them, so that they were gathered up by the hatful, and none were seen to fall by the writer of this account, the snails said to be quite different from any previously known in this district. But on page 282, we have better orthodoxy. Another correspondent writes that he had heard of this supposed fall of snails, and that he had supposed that all such stories had gone the way of witch stories. And to his astonishment, he read an account of this absurd story in a local newspaper of great and deserved repute. I thought I should, for once, like to trace the origin of one of these fabulous tales, he said. And as I suspected, said this correspondent, I found that the snails were of a familiar land species and that they had been upon the ground in the first place. He found that the snails had appeared after the rain and that astonished rustics had jumped to the conclusion that they had fallen. He met one person who said that he had seen the snails fall. This was his error, says the investigator. In the Philosophical Magazine, volume 58, there is an account of snails said to have fallen at Bristol in a field of 3 acres, in such quantities that they were shoveled up. It is said that the snails may be considered as a local species. On page 457, another correspondent says that the numbers had been exaggerated and that, in his opinion, they had been upon the ground in the first place. But that there had been some unusual condition aloft comes out in his observation upon the curious azure blue appearance of the sun at the time.
Oh my gosh.
I love that. Don't be ridiculous. These snails didn't fall from the sky, but the sun was blue. That was weird. Nature, volume 47. That, according to Das Wetter, in December 1892, upon August 9th, 1892, a yellow cloud appeared over Germany, and from this cloud fell a torrential rain in which were hundreds of mussels. There is no mention whatever of whatever may have been upon the ground in the first place, and nor of a whirlwind. And there were lizards said to have fallen on the sidewalks of Montreal in Canada, December 28th, 1857. In December in Canada. Lizards. Scientific American, Volume 3. A correspondent writes from South Granville in New York that during a heavy shower, July 3rd, 1860, he heard a peculiar sound at his feet and looking down saw a snake lying as if stunned by a fall, and it then came to life. It was a gray snake about a foot long. These data have any meaning or lack of meaning or degree of damnation you please, but in the matter of the fall that occurred at Memphis, Tennessee, there occur some strong significances. Our quasi-reasoning upon this subject applies to all segregations so far considered. From the Monthly Weather Review. In Memphis, Tennessee, January 15th, 1877, rather strictly localized, or in a space of 2 blocks, and after a violent storm in which the rain fell in torrents, snakes were found. They were crawling on sidewalks, in yards, in streets, and in masses, but none were found on roofs or any other elevation above ground, and none were seen to fall. So if you prefer to believe that the snakes had always been there, or had been upon the ground in the first place, and that it was only that something occurred to call special attention to them, in the streets of Memphis, January 15th, 1877, well, that's sensible. That's the common sense that has been against us from the start. It is not said whether the snakes were of a known species or not, but that when first seen, they were of a dark brown, almost black. So they were black snakes, I suppose. If we accept that these snakes did fall, even though not seen to fall by all the persons who were out sightseeing in a violent storm, and had not been in the streets crawling loose or in thick tangled masses in the first place, if we try to accept that these snakes had been raised from some other part of this earth's surface in a whirlwind, if we try to accept that a whirlwind could segregate them, then we accept the segregation of other objects raised in that whirlwind. So then, near the place of origin, there would have been a fall of heavier objects that had been snatched up with the snakes, stones or fence rails or limbs of trees. Say that the snakes occupied the next gradation and would be the next to fall. Still farther, there would have been separate falls of lighter objects, leaves and twigs and tufts of grass. In the Monthly Weather Review, there is no mention of other falls said to have occurred anywhere in January 1877. Again, ours is the objection against such selectiveness by a whirlwind. Conceivably, a whirlwind could scoop out a den of hibernating snakes with the stones and the earth and an infinitude of other debris, snatching up dozens of snakes. I don't know how many to a den, hundreds maybe, but according to the account of this occurrence in the New York Times, there were thousands of them, alive, from 1 foot to 18 inches in length. The Scientific American records the fall and says that there were thousands of them. The usual whirlwind explanation is given, but in what locality snakes exist in such abundance is yet a mystery, it says. This matter of enormousness of numbers suggests to me something of a migratory nature, but that snakes in the United States do not migrate in the month of January, if ever.
Yeah, they're not hatching either, probably
Right.
at that time.
Yeah.
But I have seen videos of, I think I was watching some kind of nature show on Netflix or something like that, and there was some amazing footage of like a
den of babies.
den of these baby snakes after they hatched. Well, I can't remember. Was it right after they hatched? It was just a massive collection of these garter snakes, and they were actually, I think it was a mating ceremony type of thing. Ceremony, whatever they do. And it was just, it looked like thousands of these snakes and they're just all over each other.
Yeah.
And then there's this game that they play where the females, like the males are the small ones and the females are the larger ones. And so the males are all like fighting to like, they coil up around the female and try to hang on while she climbs out of this pit that they're all in. And so it's like, a few, maybe one or two males actually makes it up the slope that she's climbing, hanging on to her. But it was just crazy, this footage of just all these snakes. I mean, they do. I don't know where that was either. I can't say if it was, where in the world this was. It could have been anywhere.
This was Memphis, Tennessee. So, I mean, yes, there are snakes, right?
Yeah.
But January?
Yeah, I know. They would be hibernating.
Yeah.
They would be underground.
So they weren't there before the storm. The storm was said to be like particularly violent.
Right. So the only thing I would think of in the normal course of things, without any strangeness, would be a storm, a torrential rainfall that flooded their dens, and so they all come out.
Yeah.
To, they come out of hibernation and they get to the surface until the storm is done, and then they go back.
Yeah. In January.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they were asleep underground in January and their den filled up with water, then they'd come out.
Yeah. There were thousands of them, but
Or die.
they were in a small area, or a localized area, a space of 2 blocks. Crawling on sidewalks, in yards, and in streets, and in masses, it says.
So snails, snakes, frogs, like worms, all these animals that live underground out of sight
Yeah.
in a torrential rainfall will come out in order to survive
Yeah.
just for a little while. And then they'll go back down in their holes after it dries up.
Yeah.
But fishes, no.
That's right.
Fishes don't come out of water when it floods.
That's right.
to survive.
Okay. Where was I at here? Yeah. So this matter of enormousness of numbers suggests to me something of a migratory nature. But snakes in the United States do not migrate in the month of January, if ever. As to falls or flutterings of winged insects from the sky, prevailing notions of swarming would seem explanatory enough. Nevertheless, in instances of ants, there are some peculiar circumstances. There were falls of fishes in June 13th, 1889 in Holland. Ants, August 1st, 1889 in Strasbourg. And little toads, August 2nd, 1889 in Savoy. A fall of ants in Cambridge in England, summer of 1874. Some were wingless, listed in the Scientific American. An enormous fall of ants in Nancy in France, July 21st, 1887. Most of them were wingless. Nature, volume 36, a fall of enormous unknown ants the size of wasps in Manitoba in June 1895.
Wouldn't want to be in that shower.
Yeah. However, our expression will be that wingless, larval forms of life, in numbers so enormous that migration from some place external to this earth is suggested, have fallen from the sky. That these migrations, if such can be our acceptance, have occurred at a time of hibernation and burial far in the ground of larvae in the northern latitudes of this earth. That there is significance and recurrence of these falls in the last of January, or that we have the square of an incredibility in such a notion as that selection of larvae by whirlwinds compounded with the selection of the last of January. I accept that there are snow worms upon this earth, whatever their origin may have been. In the Proc Acad Nat Sci Proceedings of the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia, there is a description of yellow worms and black worms that have been found together on glaciers in Alaska. Almost positively, there were no other forms of insect life upon these glaciers, and there was no vegetation to support insect life except microscopic organisms. Nevertheless, the description of this probably polymorphic species fits a description of larvae said to have fallen in Switzerland, and less definitely fits another description. There is no opposition here, if our data of falls is clear. Frogs of everyday ponds look like frogs said to have fallen from the sky, except the whitish frogs of Birmingham. However, all falls of larvae have not positively occurred in the last of January. London Times, April 14th, 1837. That, in the parish of Bromford Speak, Devonshire, a large number of black worms, about 3/4 of an inch in length, had fallen in a snowstorm. In Tim's yearbook, 1877, it is said that in the winter of 1876, in Norway, worms were found crawling upon the ground. This occurrence is considered a great mystery because the worms could not have come up from the ground inasmuch as the ground was frozen solid at the time, and because they were reported from other places also in Norway. Immense numbers of black insects in a snowstorm in 1827 in Russia. Fall with snow at Urenburg in Russia, December 14th, 1830, of a multitude of small black insects said to have been gnats, but also said to have had flea-like motions. Large numbers of worms found in a snowstorm upon the surface of snow, 4 inches thick, near Sangerfield, New York, November 18th, 1850. This is from Scientific American. The writer thinks that the worms had been brought to the surface of the ground by rain, which had fallen previously. Scientific American, February 21st, 1891. A puzzling phenomenon has been noted frequently in some parts of the Valley Bend District, Randolph County, Virginia, this winter. The crust of the snow has been covered 2 or 3 times with worms resembling ordinary cut worms. Where they come from, unless they fall with the snow, is inexplicable.
Yep. Inexplicable.
Inexplicable. So yeah, we'll probably end it there. There's a bunch more here, and it's interesting because these are in winter.
Yeah.
So it's like, yes, all that stuff you're saying about things coming out of the ground and rain, but then you have worms crawling on the snow.
Yeah. But a rain in winter, it means it's not actually that cold at the time. So,
but that one particularly in Norway where the ground is frozen.
yeah, that's weird.
Right. All right.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
It just reminds me this one time there was a big flood here in the Hill Country, and I guess this was the 2002 flood, maybe.
Yeah.
I was in San Antonio, and it was just coming down in buckets, and we were like, "Hey, let's go." There was a highway nearby, a couple of miles from where I was staying. It's basically way out in the wilderness, but this big highway. And there were a couple of big bridges on it, and there was a place it was called the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone. And so they had built a dam down there in this ravine for rainwater catchment. Basically, it just collects all this runoff water, forms
lets it soak
a
in.
basin. Yeah, to keep it from running off. Anyway, soak in to recharge the Edwards Aquifer. So we're like, hey, let's go down there and check it out. Check. It's in the middle. I mean, it's just torrential rainfall.
Yeah.
So we gear up and we go down there, and I think the rain actually let up, and we parked on the side of the highway and we walked down the side of the bridge and went down to the dam area. And
I kind of remember this. You were stuck in San Antonio, right?
Yeah.
I was out here hobbling around with a cane at the time.
Yeah. Well, we were standing on the top of the dam, and we're looking at the water. I guess it was maybe 4 or 5 feet down from the top of the dam, and it was just covered with debris, right, from the rain that's been washing it into this catch. Because normally it's dry.
Yeah.
So there's all this debris, bark and leaves and stuff floating on top of the water, and it was when it was coming up, we just suddenly noticed like every piece of debris had like a mass of insects all over it.
Oh yeah.
So there were just hundreds, maybe thousands of scorpions and ants and just all this, and we were like, oh my God, it was this crazy scene. And of course,
dive in.
Yeah, it's there. There's more debris floating in, and it's just covered in all these insects. It was wild to see that.
Wow,
all of them rafting on these little pieces of, and then the water is rising up, and we're like, okay, it's visibly rising very fast, so like we should go.
Yeah.
So we start hiking back up to the highway, and then we hear it behind us.
It'll start pouring over the edge of it.
We look back and it's just like boom, coming down over the dam. It was a pretty awesome sight. No one died.
Except for all those bugs.
Except for maybe all the bugs. Yeah. But I was just blown away by the number of scorpions.
Oh,
just hanging out on every little piece of floating material in that water.
Wow. Maybe they rained out of the sky.
It could have. They were albinos. No, I'm just kidding. All right, folks. Well, that's it for today.
Yep. brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com if you guys want to email us. Check out the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. If you want to support the show, you can do that through Patreon or PayPal. There's links to that on the website.
Yep. And thanks again from Edward Joy.
Yeah.
For the $50 donation.
Associate executive producer. And thanks to all you guys. I'm tired. I'm sick. So we're done.
And tired.
We love you guys.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.